1. So, what are the things everyone in this debate can agree on? Number one, the president is the primary actor we have to be concerned about here, seeing as it's an actor motion. And number two, there are 4 motives to keep in mind. Number one, he wants to remain in power. Number two, he believes in China's hegemony and supremacy over the West. Number 3, he wants to have as much economic alliances as possible. And number 4, he wants to improve the reputation of China as an individual country and through the BRICS alliance. So at this point in the debate, we understand that we're all fighting for a similar thing. Which side has Xi Jinping's better interest in mind considering these motives? And that's the crux of the debate. It's not just about Russia and China as individual countries. It's about what he wants specifically for his country and why he should make that decision in the first place. So that leads me to a few rebuttals. So even if government whip tells us that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a stalemate, we don't know if Russia will win with Chinese military support. But we do know that if a political partner withdraws from their word, a country is more likely to retaliate politically and economically. If China backtracks on their word, there are 3 harms. First, it destabilizes BRICS Plus, which is what we get from DLO extension. Secondly, it ruins relationships between Russia and China, evident in Russia likely retaliating by selling yuan or RMB reserves in order to retaliate against China. This is what they did to their US dollar reserves when the US refused to help them and chose to side with Ukraine. Third, it further ruins Xi's already shaky political image as what Gov characterized. So, GovWhip says that China has other trade partners. I mean, yeah, true, but losing out on a large country like Russia just isn't strategic, especially in his interest. Why would you make your slice of the pie smaller by alienating another partner? It's ultimately a bad decision, politically and strategically. And they say that we can use this military conflict elsewhere. But we tell you that if we spend this on the border with India, on China, or in Southeast Asia, these are all speculative at best, and in fact may have the same host of harms when you directly get involved in conflict, as opposed to by proxy via Russia. Government rebuts us by saying war is expensive, but at the same time, it gives a layer of analysis by saying that there are other worse conflicts we entrench ourselves in. That's somewhat of a contradiction. We recognize that war is expensive, but at least we do it by extension through proxy. So there's less risk in doing it through China, through Russia, as opposed to directly getting involved in it. In fact, the interests of the CCP and the Chinese people lead to a host of backlash given the reaction to Taiwan and the disputed Southeast Asian island territories, as my LO mentioned earlier. Government shoots themselves in the foot when they responded to our case. So there are 3 standards in this debate. Firstly on scope, which side has a bigger scope in consideration? Because on opposition side, we had a micro-macro analysis from China as an individual country and then BRICS as an alliance. My LO and DLO proved to you that withdrawing military support doesn't make sense in the interest of China as a country because it just doesn't align with the 4 motives I mentioned earlier in my speech. The impact of withdrawal from government side is that on a macro scale, this immediately decreases the image of China that China has of being a nation that is powerful and a reliable ally. So if Xi Jinping's motive is to remain in power, as we all agreed in this debate, his decision to suddenly pull out means not taking the POI will put him at risk of losing that power. It especially doesn't make sense at the macro scale, because of the BRICS alliance, because you ultimately are perceived as unreliable and unstable as an ally. If you can't even commit to the alliance with Russia, what more BRICS Plus? On government side, they weren't able to give the bigger impact of this withdrawal. They weren't able to respond or take down my DLO's extension on BRICS Plus. They barely even engaged with it. And that remains an argument that is still standing in this debate. My second standard here is which side of the house keeps China safer. On government side, they assert that a weak Russia is a strong China. But Mayello made it pretty clear that we just don't know how Russia will react to this withdrawal. What we do know is that it sends a bad message out there. It sends a message that China just doesn't want to be as strong an ally anymore, which creates possible tension between these 2 global superpowers. If Russia reacted badly, we can't say that a weak Russia is a strong China. Let's also keep in mind that the alliance between Russia and China is not just militaristic, but economic. China loses influence over Russia, and it does have an effect on the Chinese economy, a lot more than government would like to admit. It isn't just a weak Russia can be a strong China. It's that they have a relationship that can consequently affect each other if one of their alliances goes wrong. On the opposition side, they maintain that an alliance without having to risk any possible tension, which puts China not only... Oh, sorry, on the upside, we maintain the alliance without having to risk any more possible tension, which puts China not only more safe, but also makes sure that the BRIC alliance can be successful, and it doesn't have to have internal problems between China and Russia. Let's take a step back and acknowledge both sides' impacts. Not gonna take the POI. Thank you. Anyways, taking a step back and actually looking at the overall impact of both sides. So even in the best case scenario of government, their frame is a bit backwards because they fail to acknowledge that withdrawal will always be interpreted as weakness. This is something Xi Jinping would never want for the country he's been a president of for a decade, a country he's been building up for the longest time. And so for those reasons, Gov cannot take this debate because they can't even take all of his motives into mind. Remember, I mentioned 4 in my speech. On opposition side, even in our worst case scenario, we still have the following impacts. Number 1, China, more specifically Xi Jinping, is still in power. Number 2, China and Russia are still in alliance over their shared hatred for the West, so they still maintain their supremacy over the West. Number 3, Russia and China will still have an economic alliance and nothing will have to go bad. And number 4, China's reputation doesn't have to be weakened. And consequently, Xi Jinping doesn't have to worry about what China is going to look like to foreign powers and BRICS Plus. So we were the only side of the House that maintained these 4 motives throughout the entire debate, and for all those reasons, proud to oppose.